back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are keeping calm and staying completely local. You can find all of our stuff out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault that we're doing with Baltimore businesses and local friends of ours we've had on the program talking about the pandemic. And, of course, at WNST.net, we also have the Baltimore Positive programming that Don Moeller and I have put together, including tons of stuff about doctors and medicine and insurance and food banks and mental health during this challenge, as well as Cal Ripken. And you can hear all of that as well as up in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Luke Jones joining us now to talk all things draft. We still do have the sports part of our WNST thing. I have put on my John Ogden 1996 hat. I've fired up the Sporticulture magma lamp. And I do want to point out, Luke, Court sent these beautiful flowers here, and it's a little gloomy out. I've opened the window here in the studio, and I have my Art Modell picture out. But these flowers are holding up, but he sent a whole bunch of stuff that my cat keeps getting into. And, Luke, I know you have cats as well. My cat is really, really liking the sage and peppermint bushes that Court sent over here that we're planting out. So it is spring, even though we're all a little sequestered. And the one thing that we all celebrated was at least Thursday, and hopefully for the rest of the weekend we could sit around, drink beer, eat pizza, fire up wings, or do what I did on I did sausage on Thursday night. I'm going straight into tacos and beer and salsa and hopefully some Pizza John's and probably some crabs or crab cakes. I'm going to stop and see Costas and Al's and Faidley's next week. I haven't had a proper crab cake in a month and a half, so I got to get out to our sponsors. How are you holding up? And a weird draft for you up on the farm as well, Luke Jones, right?
Yeah, it was definitely weird not being at the team facility, but it was fun to sit back and watch the draft. I think we've talked about this, anything that can remind us of normalcy, anything that feels unrelated to the virus or stay-at-home orders or sickness, death. I mean, various things that we're all dealing with either directly or indirectly. I think it was fun just to sit back and think about a 2020 NFL season, regardless of the level of uncertainty anyone feels about that right now. And knowing that this is the next wave of NFL players, so many of these guys, especially in the first round, you get deeper into the weekend and more people tend to fall off in terms of interest. I mean, I get that. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to say that I know every single player drafted.
Now, hang on a second. Round. Hold on. This is something you would say in the past where, like, the kids had a lacrosse game or the weather was too good or you were going to go hiking or fishing or whatever you would be, bowling as they're doing in Georgia right now, apparently. Good for them. Put your fingers in the holes and wipe on and off. I would just say, like, this would be the one thing. We've got to watch the draft without a mask on. At least I did. So when we go out of the house, we don't have that going on. But nobody's got anything else to do Friday or Saturday, bro. All right? I mean, to some degree, we are captive, and the ball game ain't coming on next week, and we're not going to the Derby or the Preakness, and we're not having lacrosse. So this is it, and I think it's a little bit of a binge. It's a little bit of meatballs for sports fans for a couple of days that, even my wife's sitting here saying, well, this is not so bad. It's sort of normal, Who's this Patrick Queen guy? Let me look him up. Why did Ozzie ever draft anyone from LSU? What's up?
Yeah. Well, it's just like people who wanted the ESPN to drop all 10 parts of the Michael Jordan documentary last Sunday night. I mean, that's just the way it is right now. But more specifically, what I meant was, that first round, second, third round. If you're a college football fan, I mean, you're seeing lots of guys that you watched, especially when you consider, look how many players from the SEC drafted in the first round. I mean, just go down the list, and you see why the SEC has the reputation that it does, because you're talking about first-round picks, a litter of first-round picks that are going to make big impacts for their football teams, at the next level. So fun in that way, and by the time we get to Saturday afternoon, the average fan's not going to know which players are being picked, and maybe there's a rare guy here or there from a specific school that either you attended or you root for, but other than that, it kind of falls by the wayside under normal circumstances. To your point, maybe a little less of that this year, but that first round, that's exciting because, you just think, and I even did a very brief kind of retrospective kind of look back at the Ravens' history of first-round picks and, Hall of Famers and Pro Bowl players and a league MVP in Lamar Jackson and players of the year and defensive rookies of the year, Super Bowl MVPs. But then, you also have Kyle Bowler and Travis Taylor and Rashad Perriman and Matt Elam. So, you know there's no guarantee. There's a possibility that Patrick Queen doesn't work out. That's just that's the nature of this. But it's also what makes this fun, because there is that hope, there is that thought of the future, and, there's no guarantee with that. I think, we're all kind of dealing with that in a different way, in a much more real-life kind of way as far as when we're going to get back to some semblance of normalcy. But in the meantime, fun to watch the draft and kick back, watch some highlights, agree with analysts, disagree with analysts, and get back to football talk that I think is very much welcome this time of year.
All right, let's get to the draft itself, and with all of the nonsense that went on that we did not participate in this year, right? We didn't go to Indianapolis and poke and prod and drink and freeze, quite frankly, and we didn't do any of that. There was no pro days, there was no liars luncheon. I didn't even get a crab cake out of the deal, right? So all of this goes on, and the draft actually happens. And, Joe Burrow goes to Cincinnati and says poignant things. And, the Redskins fall in line and take the local kid with the dreadlocks. And then the tanking for Tua worked out even for the Dolphins, right? There weren't trades. There weren't ups and downs and weird things. There were a couple players you say, well, maybe that, we didn't see that coming or whatever. But there was no, oh, my God, the Ravens traded up and did this or that. And for all of that, the Steelers don't make a pick, right? The Bengals have their joy. The Browns are what they are. The Ravens are feted as the 14-2 team that had one big need and addressed it. So, I think we wake up and think, well, maybe the Ravens are 15-1 now. At least I do.
I'm not ready to say 15-1, but certainly they addressed a very clear need. I think interior offensive line. But you're right. In terms of looking at the first round, it was very normal, I would say. The trades started off slow, but we ended up getting a decent number of trades by the time we got to the end of the first round. The OMG kind of wow moment was Green Bay trading to 26 and taking Jordan Love, doing exactly what they did with Brett Favre way back when to Aaron Rodgers now. So I thought that was very clearly the kind of wow moment of the first round. But to your point, I think for the most part, it was fairly chalky in terms of what mock drafts look like. Not that anyone nails the mock draft, but I think for the most part, you looked at what was going to happen, and the quarterbacks always dictate this, right? For all the talk of concerns about Tua's health, which I think are very real. Let's face it, we saw Dennis Pitta go through this for the better part of 4 years trying to continue his NFL career, and we saw how it ultimately ended up. So Tua having a similar injury, I think Miami absolutely is going to have moments where they're holding their breath and wondering, not just, he's going to play, but how will he stay healthy? How long will he be able to play? What are the long-term ramifications of that? But they end up taking him at 5, which is funny because the mindset all last year, I remember vividly you and I talking about this after week 1 when the Ravens just demolished them, talking about the idea of tanking and selling off players and the ethical dilemma of that with when you're talking about a violent game like football. Well, Miami ended up playing pretty hard, won a couple games, and everyone thought, wow, they messed this up, and they end up getting Tua anyway. And, of course, that prompts the Chargers to take Justin Herbert. So we don't see the slide from those two guys. Those top 3 quarterbacks go in the first 6 picks.
And either nobody felt the value to move up for them, or,
I I think that's interesting. I mean, there's certainly a thought of an Indianapolis. I mean, people were wondering, would New England make a play for one of the quarterbacks, and here the Patriots end up trading out of the first round.
I guess that's my point. There was just so much speculation, as there always is. And from that perspective, it was a little bit of a fizzle from, nobody traded their draft for Ricky Williams or whatever. And I even said to Dennis before the draft, and of course Dennis will be here on Monday from 9 to 11, as will Bruce Posner on Monday morning from 8 till 9 with Terp Talk. But it'll be Ravens and draft talk for everybody, all weekend long. And, of course, Luke and I will be up in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault and tweeting and doing all that stuff. But, for all of the pre-speculation and all the moving around, I thought that the owners are the crazy ones, right? Like, usually it's about Dan Snyder or the knucklehead with the Browns trying to make a splash, or the crazy Stephen Raw. All of the knuckleheads are all already up there, right? I mean, Joe Douglas is hugging his kids. He works for a nut bag up with the Jets. So, there's all these nutty owners, and I thought, man, they're home. They've lost a third of their personal wealth. Whatever's going on in their heads, they want to have fun. This is their chance to be in Vegas, and nobody did anything weird, and I kind of thought there would, Jerry Jones, I thought somebody would want to, steal some thunder in the middle of all of this, but very, very quiet, which shocked me because I said that that's sort of the wild card that you can't count on who's going to get itchy, right?
Yeah, you're right. And like I said, other than, clearly Green Bay drafting Jordan Love, drafting the heir apparent to Aaron Rodgers, just like back in 2005, Aaron Rodgers was the heir apparent to Brett Favre. But I think the closest, because you mentioned owners, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, the Raiders taking Henry Ruggs, who I think is a good wide receiver. Don't get me wrong. He was in my top 3 or 4, certainly, but everyone else was talking about whether Jerry Jeudy, his teammate at Alabama, or C.D. Lamb, the talented wide receiver from Oklahoma. Henry Ruggs going to the Raiders, Ruggs being probably the fastest wide receiver in the draft. Doesn't that sound like an Al Davis move right there?
It's a Cliff Branch pick right there is what that is.
Always going for the track guy. Although, like I said, not as though Ruggs is he was a first-round wide receiver. It's just many people seem to lean toward Jerry Jeudy or C.D. Lamb as being the first wide receiver. So
hold on, Darius Hayward-Bay spent 10 years in the league now. Come on.
Yeah. I'm not comparing this to that. I'm just saying if you're looking for one of those nods to the past, I think Al Davis would have liked drafting Henry Ruggs, being the speedster that he is. But you're right. In terms of just looking at the overall picture of the first round, like I said, other than Green Bay taking the quarterback, everything else felt very plausible. Everything else felt very logical in that way. And look, we know right now, sitting here, we don't know which players, but we know a large percentage of these guys, in 2 years, their fan bases and those organizations are going to cringe at the pick because it's just, they're going to have a guy that they're not terribly happy with, and there's going to be someone that came off the board a couple picks later that they're going to say, oh, why didn't we take that guy? That's the nature of this. That's what makes it fun. But, again, you kind of look at how it played out, and, I would say maybe a couple cornerbacks were taken a little bit early compared to their true talent level on the board, but it speaks to how valuable the cornerback position is. So overall, in that way, it felt like a very grounded kind of NFL draft, and I think that was probably to be expected because I think for each of these teams, while we saw the camera shots of head coaches and general managers and in some cases owners, but you didn't have the same kind of scenario that you have with your typical war room where you've got 20 scouts in there and the GM, the head coach, and the assistant coaches, and you have so many voices. And don't get me wrong, teams still did that, but it had to be streamlined a little bit more because this is a very different process going on compared to your normal draft. So I think it was interesting to see it play out the way that it did. But to your point, yeah, not really that many picks that made you go, wow, other than Green Bay trading up and drafting Jordan Love out of Utah State.
I've talked so much to my wife because she's the only one I talk to around here other than the people I talk to into the camera, and I zoom. unintended consequences, right? Like all of the stuff, like where gas gets sold for less than $1 a barrel, or they give it away. The C.J. Mosley unintended consequences of 1 year. What happened 13 months ago, and also, what happened 2 years ago when they drafted Lamar Jackson? Like, the fact that anybody could have taken Lamar Jackson, the fact that they took Hayden Hurst, who they've now given away, and Lamar's turned into this superstar. But if C.J. Mosley just decides to stay, right, they're probably not picking it. That things happen along the way, and he'll be compared to C.J. Mosley, and we'll see that when he left last year, we were like, well, they're going to have a hard time replacing that. And then you even go back to the Arthur Browns and the picks they've missed on, the Kenny Youngs, right? And to say what happens in these positions, how many safeties they went through to get to Eric Weddle that they missed on the Elams and the Huffs and all these things that go right and wrong. Right now, all's right in the world, right? They have the new Ray Lewis, the new C.J. Mosley, the new linebacker, and all that stuff. But the reason that happened was the Jets gave Mosley a lot more money, and they believed that Mosley was coming back. So things happen with these picks that move everything around, right?
Oh, no question. I mean, the trickle-down effect is immense. I mean, think about this. I mean, we've spent so much time over the last calendar year talking about the exact position that you just mentioned, inside linebacker. For 17 years in Baltimore, that position was not talked about. Why? Because, well, Ray Lewis was there. I mean, it was just that simple. You don't have to talk about it. So, yeah, I mean, there's always that trickle-down effect. And I think, I've mentioned this to you. I've talked about this a lot with Dennis. When you look at the Ravens in this draft specifically, and, Patrick Queen, yes, but the work they'll do over the rest of the weekend, they have a colossal opportunity here, not just to improve themselves for 2020. I mean, everyone always thinks about the short term, but we all know that the lifeblood of any accomplished championship organization in the National Football League is being good at the draft, right? I mean, and we know there's a lot of variance. There's a lot of luck involved, more so than even the best GMs would care to admit. I mean, Eric DaCosta talked about this a couple weeks ago, the amount of luck that is truly involved in it. And, it speaks to what you just said. The player that you really coveted that would have been the perfect fit, the perfect pick for your system, the perfect fit, goes off the board 3 picks before you're on the clock, and you couldn't make a trade up. I mean, there's always that butterfly effect. But I think when you look at the...
Are you mentioning Murray in that way? I mean, would they have really valued him? I don't know. That's for DaCosta to know, right? And Ortiz, the whole staff. Well, we may know that one way or another at some point, but we'll never know, right? If they wanted him that bad, they had to give up a 2 or a 3, would it move around, bounce around to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, if Kenneth Murray ends up being the next Ray Lewis and Patrick Queen's the next Arthur Brown, then yeah, you'll say, wow, they should have made the move to go get Murray. I mean, but again, we have no idea how that's going to play out. But I think going back to the point I was trying to make, 7 picks in the top 150, and typically that's a pretty good benchmark as far as draftable players, as far as guys that really have a chance, understanding that you're not going to have all 150 truly hit. But I think where the Ravens are now, as we're approaching that time where they're going to be talking about a contract for Lamar Jackson, most likely next year, and between next year and the time his 5th-year option is up. You hope it doesn't get to that point, because then you're talking about the franchise tag and hurt feelings and things that the Dallas Cowboys are dealing with right now with Dak Prescott, for example. Or
C.J. Mosley in a snowstorm out in front of a car in the middle of the night.
You're talking about your quarterback. I mean,
right.
That's so much different than any other position. But when you have Lamar Jackson's contract situation at some point in the next 12 to 24 months being addressed,
well, you have superstar players. You were 14-2. This is the problem you have when you have Ed Reed, Ray Lewis, Haloti Ngata, blah, blah, down the line. I mean, John Ogden. I mean, they've always had this. And I know Eric loves to run around and say, we're never going to get in cap jail. We're going to manage the cap. We're going to manage the cap. And then they wind up, drafting great play. I mean, what if Patrick Queen winds up being Ray Lewis? Then which Ronnie Stanley or Marlon Humphrey are you going to push off the side of the boat? Because you're not pushing Lamar off, right?
Exactly, and it's funny that you mentioned the whole cap jail thing. And look, you can manage the cap, but I'll tell you this: if you're never feeling some pains when it comes to the salary cap, guess what? That tells me you don't have a very good football team. I mean, that's really what it tells me. But
yeah, the Jaguars and the Raiders and the Browns always have cap space, right?
To the point that you just made, though, it isn't just Lamar Jackson. I mean, Ronnie Stanley. I'll bet you Pizza John's right now. If Ronnie Stanley signs with the Baltimore Ravens or whoever he signs with, he's going to be the highest paid left tackle in the league. I mean, that's just he's in his mid-20s. He's been to a Pro Bowl. He was an All-Pro last year. He has not missed very many games in his career. I mean, he is. I'm not saying he's the absolute best left tackle in the league, but he's going to have his turn in line to be the highest paid left tackle in the league. It's going to be him and Laramie Tunsil. Take your pick, whichever one gets signed long-term first, then the other one will follow in that regard. I mean, that's just the way this works. And Marlon Humphrey, maybe he doesn't become the highest paid corner in football, but he's going to be on the very short list. So you're talking about 3 market-setting deals at 3 extremely valuable positions. Quarterback, clearly the most valuable, and then take your pick, left tackle, corner, edge rusher. That's wide receiver. You're kind of into that second tier as far as the most valuable position. So that's what makes this draft so important. If Patrick Queen doesn't work out, then in a year or two, you're having to go to the free agent market, and maybe you're not spending what the Jets spent on C.J. Mosley, but you're spending capital, you're spending resources, you're using cap space to satisfy a need that you hope you just addressed. That's why it's so important for the Ravens, if they want to keep their salary cap picture more tenable, that you hit on 3 or 4 of these top 7 or 8 picks that they have this weekend. I mean, that's just the reality of it. You're not going to hit on all of them, but if you can come away, if Queen is a successful pick, and you can come away with at least 1 or 2 other starters, and then at least 1 or 2 other situational quality contributors, then, boy, you're talking about having a great draft, and that's just fewer dollars that you have to allocate and use at other positions over the next 3 to 4 years. I mean, that's just going to be the truth. The guys they're drafting now are guys that'll still be really cheap 3 years from now when Lamar Jackson's making, I don't know, maybe $40 million a year, whatever it is.
Look at the men they've made rich. Zadarius Smith, Matt Judon, Wagner, Jensen. Just go through the list of these guys that they've made rich that they haven't paid. They got the cheap labor on. I mean, Judon up until like right now, literally, right? They've worked on the cheap. And all the while paying the Weddles and the Jeffersons and the Flaccos and the Ingrams and the whomevers that they've imported, right, at whatever that rate would be, the going rate, Earl Thomas, right, that it really is an extraordinary thing that they've done, and they wind up getting another guy that we all nod our head and say, and I'm wearing the John Ogden hat here, and, as I'm looking out the window at the Ray Lewis statue, right, and we say, well, yeah, they do this better than anyone else, and that's, it's a tribute to how WNST can still exist all these years later, because people have faith and confidence in this football team that they're going to be pretty good if they can get on the field this year, and we could do that without masks on, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're on that short list. I mean, you look at, New Orleans is drafted really well. You go back to the draft they had a couple years back where that really turned them around. It kind of gave, Drew Brees this final act as far as having some damn good teams. And, the Ravens, and let's face it, they did go through a post-Super Bowl 47 lull there where, their drafts weren't terrible, but you had some more misses. I mean, you just mentioned it, Eric Weddle, Tony Jefferson, and Earl Thomas. Those contracts don't happen if Matt Elam and Terrence Brooks were successful picks early in the.
I may disagree with that because those guys were great. Were players, they'd be making $8 million.
Well, let's face it. Not all 3 of them aren't. You're not doing those 3 contracts if Matt Elam and Terrence Brooks.
Well, look, Ronnie Stanley and Marlon Humphrey, those have worked out great. Now you got to go pay them $20 million.
No, I'm not trying to nitpick. I'm just saying that you're not going to be a home run in the draft every year. I mean, the data supports that. Have the Ravens done it at a higher level than other teams? If you go back to 1996, yeah. if you look at 2006 through 2016, Pro Football Focus just did a study on this. The Ravens, they were a little more middle of the pack over that decade. But, I mean, that's the nature of the beast. You're not going to hit on every single pick. I mean, and GMs know that. That's why the point I was making was you have 7 picks in the top 150. It gives you a chance, you can trade up or do some things in that nature, but in some ways it's just having an extra lottery ticket or two to roll the dice with guys that you feel pretty decent about and guys that you've evaluated, and you feel a certain level of confidence that what they're able to do translates to the next level. So in that regard, we've seen the Ravens really bounce back. I mean, the 2017 draft with Marlon Humphrey and Chuck Clark, 2018, of course, with Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews and Orlando Brown, and add Bradley Bozeman to that mix as far as starters to come from that draft, and 2019 so far so good with Marquise Brown and we'll see what happens with Miles Boykin and Jalen Ferguson. But if you can have another draft of that caliber that we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years, especially, then boy, you're setting yourself up to have a little more sustainability with your roster, to be able to keep the elite guys that you have. Yeah, you got to make some other difficult decisions, and that's why one thing that I would not be shocked to see over the course of the weekend, I could see a safety. I could see an offensive tackle that perhaps they move inside with the thought that, okay, presumably you're going to pay Ronnie Stanley. Are you going to be able to pay Orlando Brown too in a couple years? That's a lot you're going to have to devote to the offensive tackle position. So, if it's sign Stanley and you'll have to see what happens with Orlando Brown, then, well, if you draft an offensive tackle now and he plays guard and he might be able to kick out to tackle in 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, then there you go. Again, it's all about a big puzzle. The salary cap, the draft, free agency, it's all part of it. And Eric DeCosta is trying to figure that out. And hey, when you're talking about a 14-2 team and they were able to bring back everyone they wanted to bring back, other than Marshall Yanda deciding to retire, then yeah, you're in good shape in that regard. You have a chance to be really special, not just over the next year or two, but if you hit on some of these draft picks, you can continue that even with having a high-priced quarterback at that point.
He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. He will be tweeting all weekend. Dennis will be tweeting all weekend. On Monday morning, we'll all be together. Bruce Posner will be here from 8 until 9. And Dennis will be here from 9 to 11 doing the special Thursday edition on Monday. And all our draft coverage. Coach Billick will be here. Eric Edholm is going to join us. Lance Zierlein. We're going to have a bunch of people doing draft over the weekend. You can find it all at WNST.net, where we're keeping calm, staying local. I want to give a couple of shout-outs to some sponsors, new sponsors, great friends. I've been holding up Strategic Factory here, and big shout-out to everybody over there. I've talked about Raskin Global, and Leonard Raskin's been on. We've talked about finances, money, insurance, banks, all of that stuff. Go to RaskinGlobal.com. Leonard's going to be on after the draft next week as well, so shout out there. Mimi Brown's our friend from State Farm, and I'm putting together some new insurance for myself and my condo and my deal, and got to know Mimi a little bit up in the Canton area. I'm going to get everybody out to her. You can find her through State Farm, 410-878-0232. It says so right on the koozie. I got a red koozie, State Farm. Mimi at insuringbmore.com. But she's up in Canton, but you can't go visit her because we can't get within 6 feet of each other. But I'm going to have Mimi on next week talking about insurance and all that kind of stuff. I've had Lou Weinkamp come on, talk about estates and different stuff. He runs Franco's over in Catonsville, so a big shout out to those folks. And Todd Schuler's been joining me a whole bunch, former delegate who is connected with my lifer friend, my childhood friend, Mark Miller. Blondell Miller Schuler, injury lawyers, 410-687-7878. DamnGoodLawyer.com is the way to find them. And we're going to bring Todd on next week. So we'll have some draft stuff next week. Some thoughts around here. I'll be out on Facebook, Twitter. My cat will be out with me. I am writing ways to make Baltimore better and reading about it. I saw Baltimore Magazine had a How to Fix Baltimore. We're going to have Ron Cassie on. We've had Brian Frosch, Scott Schellenberger, Cal Ripken, Brian Billick. It's all up at WNST.net. where we are keeping calm. We are staying local. We're always Towson, Baltimore, and AM 1570, and always Baltimore positive, even in my John Ogden 1996 hat.